So this is our second part of our notes for G.1 Principles of Geography, and it is covering the notes for G1C and G1D. So just a reminder, G.1's learning objective is that you will be able to explain how geographers use maps and data to contextualize spatial relationships and to examine the human organization of space. So as I said in class, all that means is they're going to use maps and data like counting people, for instance, or it could be how many trees or where people live, and they're going to look at why do people organize themselves on Earth the way they do? Why do certain businesses happen? Why do populations tend to be in one place and another? Why are certain agricultural things occurring in one place versus another? All of that is what geographers contextualize. So what first, G1C, what geographers examine, the essential knowledge is that geographers examine human and environmental patterns across space and time by synthesizing empirical data and maps with other primary and secondary sources. So now we're going to look at how they look at that human patterns and those environmental patterns, both in space, meaning in a location on Earth, but then also through time. So what's happening today, what happened 10 years ago, what happened 50 years ago, and they're going to synthesize that and draw some conclusions. So on your notes for G1C, you're going to record your notes on the right-hand side. Later, we will come up with some level 1 and possibly some level 2 questions. They're going to help us process that information, not because you need to know it for a test in the class, but because it will help you when you are doing your performance task and have to provide some context when you're answering those learning checkpoint questions, and then also for the midterm and the final. So your first set of notes that you're going to record for the right-hand side is that geographers use a combination of graphs, charts, tables, diagrams, and maps to identify spatial patterns and relationships. So here, I know they're two different years, but here on the left, you see a chart that has the states' names in alpha order, and then how many people were recorded living in that state in the 2020 state census. So this would be an example of just a table with data. So similar data that was taken in 2016 turns that information and then puts it on a map so that we have some spatial idea of which states in the country have the highest population, which states in the country have the lowest population. So this takes that information in the chart and then just creates a visual for it. That's one thing that geographers do. Also, statistics and data, so this is numbers, can be shown on maps and graphs to show relationships, reveal trends, and allow for comparisons within regions and also between regions. So, and seeing relationships and trends, like what is happening now, will help city planners, for instance, plan resources for the future. So if you see a trend that you have very few children born in your county or your state and the population is aging, then that trend will probably create more nursing homes and pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens, and possibly they will build less schools and playgrounds because the trend is that there's less children. So looking at the map, we see two different sets of data. So this top map is showing where race, ethnic minority groups are mostly represented by county, and that was a different time period. I'm sorry that I can't see it on the map, but this is a different time period than the map in 2005, which is showing similar information this is just breaking down those minorities by their ethnic group. And you can see that this map, as the dates change, that the colors change. So this would show trends, what's been happening, and then we should be able to predict what will happen in the future. Geographers also ask questions and then they look for answers using evidence from data, maps, case studies, primary and secondary sources. So some types of questions that geographers ask is, what is it? Where is it located? Why is it there, not someplace else? How did it get there? So what were the causes that brought it there? How does whatever it is affect people? And also, how does it affect the natural environment? What are the people like that live in that location? What do those people do, like occupation? How do they live? So what's their lifestyle? How do they organize themselves? So what would be like their civilization? How do they organize that structure? And then how do they interact with the world around them? So how do they interact with people that are not in their exact location? So those would be some examples of questions that geographers ask using all of that information from data and from maps, case studies, and those primary and secondary sources. So when we do G1C, when we look at our sources, I just want you to get a preview of what those sources will be. So we are going to be looking at source 12, which is flood warnings in the United States within the years of 2008 to 2018. So we're going to be analyzing this map and seeing what information we can gather, asking some geographic questions. And then for source 13, we're going to look at a same map of the United States, but this time it's wildfires. And so this map does not just tell us things about fires in the range of 2008 to 2017, and also specific fires in 2018, but we could possibly make predictions of where we would probably see wildfires in, let's say, 2025. And then source 14 is a map of the United States. This one is showing tornadoes and hurricanes between the years of 2004 and 2018. And then you can see in the key that there are certain colors or symbols on the map that represent different things. But again, having this data put on a map helps us to then make predictions of where we would possibly see tornadic and hurricane activity in the future, and then city planners, state planners would be able to prepare for that better. So for G1D, this is all about what tools geographers use. How do they gather that information? So the essential knowledge is that geographers use geospatial data, satellite technologies, and geographic information systems, or GIS, to organize, represent, and re-examine human environmental patterns across both space and time. So we're going to use all of these technologies to look at human environmental patterns across space and time, so it makes sense to us. So again, there's not very many notes. You're going to write these notes under G1D on the right hand side. So to organize, represent, and re-examine human environmental patterns across space and time, geographers use geospatial data and satellite technologies. So some examples of that would be remote sensing satellites and aircrafts that record images and collect data, so they take photographs. And then also GPS, like you have in your phone, uses satellites to pinpoint locations and distances. So here, this image, this is remote sensing. And so this right here is the Mississippi Delta. So this is at New Orleans in 1976. And then this is how it has changed by 2001. So you can see that there's this land right here, which is submerged underwater, has increased. So there is new land. There's some retreating shoreline here. So you can see the shoreline has gotten smaller. So by using this remote sensing satellites, we can actually compare patterns on the Earth's surface over time. And then GIS, which is one of my favorite things, GIS uses data to display layers. And so we live in a world with layers. So we have the Earth, we have the buildings on top of the Earth, we have the street system on top of the Earth. So those are layers. And so GIS actually takes that Earth and splices the layers to make dynamic maps. And then those maps are used to look for new patterns and to ask those geographic questions. So if you look at here, this is not any notes to copy, but here it shows a really good image of GIS. So the first map up here shows fire hydrants and addresses, and then we have roads and streams, and then we've got watersheds, parcels of land, zoning of land. Then we have elevation, how high the Earth's surface is above sea level. Here we have satellite imagery, aerial imagery, and then you put it all together, and then this is the image that you get. So GIS literally takes images from the Earth's surface and then splices it into these different finite pieces of information that are in layers to help us look for trends, to help us see relationships. Why do people tend to live by water and not in the middle of the desert, etc. Those are your notes for G1C and G1D, and I will see you in class. Have a great one.